is my great pleasure to get to introduce Brooke Summers Perry today. And I have to say I'm a tiny bit nervous and maybe a little emotional because she's also one of my best friends. And I love that she writes about wild mint and motorcycle racing as part of her childhood. She eventually came to Houston to study architecture. Grew up in Kentucky. She quit architecture and did a spiritual direction program at the Cynical and has really been following that path of the heart and of the spirit. So please welcome Brooke to speak to Ordinary Life today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Good morning. I feel like it's been forever since I've stood in this spot. A lot has gone on. But let's start with a short prayer that will help me center myself. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing to you, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. So I have taken to make this proclamation before I speak, and it helps calm my nerves, and it helps me remind myself who I am and why I do what I do. And that is to say out loud to you and to myself that I am good enough for God. You'll understand why that's important to me to make that statement as we go through what I'll be sharing today, which I'm calling false impressions, true expressions. One of my favorite quotes from a book, Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer, is this question: is the life I am living the life that wants to live in me? So the images on the screen are of the Heinz Center, which I was fortunate to be the founding director of. It is under different leadership now, but it was quite an honor to be part of this, the beginning and the birth of this place, and the construction and design process. And the reason I'm sharing these photos is because we have this fabulous teacher that keeps telling us that we really ought to do a spiritual practice, and I have taken to using this metaphor to explain why that's so important. You know, when you have a house and you get ready to sell your house, you begin to do renovations on it, and you spend a lot of effort, time, money, and stress getting that house to make it more valuable to the marketplace. But then you realize, why didn't I do this earlier and enjoy this beautiful home the whole time I had it? I feel like that's the same way I think about spiritual practice. We have this opportunity to practice making our lives the way we want it to be right now, and living more fully and more joyfully and gratefully. Now, rather than waiting until the end of our lives or responding to some tragedy that happens or some unforeseen event that suddenly jolts us into remembering what's important in life. And so why not do that renovation now? And why not do it together? Because we all have different skills and we all have different qualities, just like a house does. And the way I see Scripture and understand it, and from my viewpoint, we all have an amazing foundation that this house is built on. And we owe it to that to do this practice and to make our home and our shared home the best it can possibly be now. So as I put in the preview, I've used a few different quotes to look at spiritual practice through a slightly more illustrative lens. One of them is Jim Carrey's quote that he used at the Maharishi University of Management, I think in 2014. This is just a little piece of that quote. All there will ever be is what's happening here and the decisions that we make in this moment, which are based in either love or fear. And then this quote from Viktor Frankl: between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. And then one more quote by Richard Rohr, which is, what we don't transform, we transmit. I used a combination of those three quotes to begin to visually, reaching back to my training in architecture, to create a diagram to show what that looks like as it relates to the moments in our life. And this is what I came up with. On the far left is the stimulus. It's something that's happening around us. And by the way, it's constant. There's always things going on around us. And then in between the stimulus and response, we're affected by the thoughts that we have about that stimulus, the judgments, all of the history that relate to that stimulus, our feelings, our emotions about it, and maybe those emotions are about our thoughts, and our body sensations. If you've been coming to this class for a while, I'm sure you've seen that iceberg, that graphic that Bill uses about a lot of what is going on for us and who we are is under the water in that iceberg. A lot of this thought, feeling, body sensation, reaction that we have to what's going on in the world around us is under the water, unless and until we do enough practice to where we've really gotten to know what's under there and how it responds to what's happening around us. And then the next yellow dot is what I think, to me, in Scripture is the eye of the needle. What are you going to pull through from all of that stuff? What's going to pull through the eye of the needle and affect and respond to what's going on in the moment? That's where the gift lies. That's where we have a choice, and we can choose fear or love. Our ego is going to automatically choose for us things that protect those things that are under the water for us. But with more practice and more awareness, we have the opportunity to bring forth the spirit and the soul that's not encumbered by our fears. And we have an ability to respond out of love, out of connection. You see there's an arrow at the bottom that kind of illustrates that we magnify in our ego's response and our quick, fearful response. We tend to magnify what's under the water for us. We magnify the thoughts and judgments, our feeling reactions and body sensations, because our reaction many times is really to solidify our judgment. We're going to act as if it's true. And so that magnifies our thought. It magnifies our emotional reaction. And I've drawn an emotional wake. If you've been around someone who's acted out of this fear and you feel like you just got swept over by the wake that they left behind from their emotional reaction, not only to the stimulus, but how they reacted to it. If you take the arrow on the top, what I'm suggesting is that spiritual practice allows us to connect with our true self and gives us the opportunity in the moment to question the thought that we're having, to let go of that judgment. Cindy Wigglesworth in SQ21 talks about what else could be true? What would it take for me to create that stimulus? It opens our mind up, and as soon as we let go of that fearful, judging thought, our emotions begin to neutralize. Our body sensation, the heart racing, the sweating, all of those things also begin to neutralize. And we're able to think more creatively about how to respond. We can bring new light and new love into this that we couldn't do if it was only our ego showing up. So I have taken to using specific examples in this model. So here's one of my favorites, because if you got here today, most likely you have driven on a highway in Houston, Texas, and you might know what this is like. The stimulus example that I used is merging on the freeway. So you may have merged on a freeway, and right when you're about to take your spot in the slow lane, someone moves from the fast lane into your lane right as you're approaching. I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it's happened to me enough, and my ego response has been high enough that I remember. I remember the thought, the feeling, the body sensation. And so that's what's happening in the stimulus. What's happening in the thought, feeling, and body response for me, I can tell you, the thought has generally been, they think they're better than me, they don't see me, I don't matter to them, and you can see why emotionally, that train's about to leave the station emotionally. And body sensation-wise, I get jittery, I sweat, I'm, all those heart racing, all those responses to that thought and those feelings. But there's a gift waiting to be opened, and that is, do I want to pause, or do I want to let my ego fast forward? In our culture, I think it's really valued to be a quick responder, right? And this is tricky, because many times that quick reaction is driven by the ego. And it takes courage and vulnerability. If you can imagine yourself in a conversation with someone that's a little heated, it takes vulnerability and courage to say, hold on, let's pause for a second, because I need to process this so that I can respond more lovingly, more compassionately. I think we can even do that on the highway. So what I'm saying is, if we fast forward and we let our ego do that quick response, we are very likely to respond with that thought, they think they're better than me, they don't see me, I'll make sure they see me. I'm going to punch on the gas, I'm going to get right on their tail, they're never going to forget that they did this to me, and they're going to see me. And by the way, there's that orange car, that poor orange car approaching both of us that I just cut off because I never saw them because my ego was so focused on getting on the tail end of the other guy. I just became the stimulus for the orange car. Now we're in this endless loop of people treating each other that way, and all this negative angst energy on the highway that ripples for who knows how long, because I'm already gone, right? I put in their needs and values underneath that as well, in nonviolent communication, which I learned about originally in this class with a guest speaker, that if you are doing a variety of practices, you may be able to, even in that moment, connect with the needs and values that you have that have been threatened by the action in the stimulus. For example, for me, the needs that are underneath this are safety and respect. That's what I want. That's what has been threatened in what I perceive as the stimulus. So if I can connect with that because I've done enough practice to do that, I can say, if I want safety and respect, it makes no sense to me to ride that guy's bumper, right? It makes a whole lot more sense for me to drive with safety and respect on the road. And that's what ripples out when I do that. So when I take the high road, if you will, I'm going to check in with the thought. It's going to neutralize my feelings, my body sensations, and I'm going to suddenly have a new way to respond. And that is to just take my place on the road and not negatively affect anyone else with my judgments and my perceptions. Because as Cindy Wigglesworth would say in her practice, I would be able to connect with, maybe this guy's new in town. Maybe his GPS just said his exit's coming up in a quarter mile. He didn't even see me. So I can respond as if he did and he doesn't like me and my car's not good enough and I'm not good enough. Or I could respond with a possibility that none of that is true. And I want more safety and respect on the road, so that's what I'm going to bring. So I call this lower loop the false self-fulfilling prophecy. If you've heard of self-fulfilling prophecy, this is the ego's self-fulfilling prophecy. If you take the high road, if you take that upper part that's based in a lot of spiritual practice, I call that the truth self-fulfilling prophecy. And I think we might all agree that it'd be a lot more fun to live in that kind of world. And one of the reasons I wrote the preview the way that I did is that everyone in this room has the power to choose that. And yes, we'd like for everyone to do that, but we have the ability to receive that gift for us. And I'm asking you to please, when you leave here, do that. Because I'll be out there on the road with you. And I also used an example when it relates to parenting. Very much the same process. So the stimulus is a child is tugging at your shirt. In my one of my children's books, the page that this is from is when you're hey mama, hey mama, hey mama, haying. Like, you know, you got the hey mamas. If I'm in the middle of another conversation, then it becomes, I don't matter to you, you don't see me, when am I going to get my space? Those are my thoughts. I might have body and feelings that come up because of those thoughts. And the needs and values under there would be to be seen and to be heard, to matter. Those are the things that are coming up for me. They happen to be the same thing that's coming up for the child in most cases as well, to be seen, to matter, to have significance. So I have a choice. I can send that kid to timeout and punish them for their behavior of interrupting me. And that's usually an immediate response, you know. Nope. And I'm not saying that's bad. I could go into a whole other talk on parenting. But I just want to focus on this one example. If I connect with my need in the moment, wanting to be heard and seen, I can also relate that my kid that wants that too. And so I can pause, check in with myself. Does my kid really think I don't matter and that's why he's tugging on my shirt? I don't think so. So I can say I value being heard. I value respect. I'm going to respond respectfully. And when I get off the phone or at that moment, whatever I choose, I'm going to bend down and listen and make sure that I respond respectfully, valuing the needs we both share. So that's an example in parenting. This one looks a little bit messier because I was unpacking some of my own stuff as I drew it. But when I look back in the world of architecture that I worked in, one of the issues that I had, because I didn't think I was good enough for God, this was before I did enough practice to really connect with that, I really responded to a lot of stimulus in the workplace to try to convince myself I was good enough for God. And this is how that looks. I get an email from the boss, and there's something about my work that I thought was complete. It's a question. It's usually a question to the whole team. I immediately thought, I didn't do enough. I dropped the ball. I should have been more clear and thorough. There shouldn't have been a question if I had done my job right. Like, all these thoughts are going through my head. The feelings are coming up are disappointment, embarrassment, fear. Body reactions are my heart races, my belly aches, and the needs and the values underneath that were competence, acceptance, respect, and that was all related to a core belief that I'm not good enough. My fast forward ego response was being the first responder. I feel like I need to go back and send an apology to a lot of people that I worked with at the time to say, I'm sorry, like I stepped in and didn't even allow you to contribute to a lot of conversations because I needed to be the first responder because that's what fed my ego. That's what really responded to my core belief that I wasn't good enough. So it was kind of like ooh, pick me, I know. Yeah, I think I was probably really annoying. But I was, blissfully unaware of all of that while I was there. After doing practice, I would hope that I would have this choice point. And actually, I did get a lot of practice in doing this in the most recent job that I had in the Heinz Center because it was it was a lot of pressure. And it was something new and something I'm so passionate about, and my not good enough went off plenty of times for me to get a lot of practice in this. And what I would have to do is pause and go back to that thought and really do connect more connection and realize, I want to be competent, I want to be accepted, I want to be respected. But then I could ask for feedback from people around me. I could ask the community for what they wanted. I could ask my boss for different ways of doing things. And this became a very rich practice. And I was able to learn a lot because I wasn't responding subconsciously. So I want to go back to this graphic for a moment and break it down and illustrate a variety of spiritual practices that help us do this. So when we look simply at the stimulus, in the practice of nonviolent communication, I learned that this phrase that they use, observation without evaluation, is really powerful in and kind of putting those judgments where they belong, giving them a back seat, if you will. So at some point, someone talked about observing like a camera would. Not the sensational reporting, but just the camera. What are the things you can pick up with your five senses? I also learned this in mindfulness practices, in working with Mickey Fine in a workshop that she did, and certainly I'm sure her 8-week program does this, and someday I'm going to do that. But really noticing what your senses can pick up like a camera without all of the judgments and assumptions that we make about what's going on. There's a variety of practices that focus just on seeing what is in the moment. And then when we get to the thoughts, emotions, and body sensations, centering prayer is my favorite practice for me, and everybody, I think could do well to find one that does this for them. But I really get to know what kind of thoughts pop up in my head in centering prayer. It's painfully obvious sometimes what those thoughts are. A variety of meditation does this. And, a lot of times, I should just speak from my own experience. When I first started meditating, I was really seeking this calm. When I meditate, I'm going to feel calm and relax. This will be a great stress reducer for me. And it was quite the opposite. Sitting with my own thoughts was very difficult and still is. But to me, the gift really is in how it informs how we react in all the moments we're not sitting alone. But getting to know your thoughts through centering prayer, through meditation. Enneagram work is also wonderful at this because the more we understand our personalities, patterns, and behaviors and thoughts, that also informs us about what's under the water in that iceberg image. There's a practice in nonviolent communication which I learned from Robert Gonzalez, which is the I'm telling myself practice. This is similar to the one I brought up that Cindy Wigglesworth has in her book, SQ21. Basically, the ability to catch the thought you have in the moment. your body sensations like sweating or racing hard or shaking may give you the red flag, and then you say, what thought am I having right now? And then you reframe that with, I'm telling myself. So use the highway example. I'm getting on the highway, I feel myself stressing out when I get cut off, and I can say, I'm telling myself that they don't think I'm good enough. I'm telling myself they think they're better than me. And that may or may not be true. And simply stating that can help reset a lot of things. And I know I'm throwing out a lot of different practices and a lot of different ways of doing this. And I just want to let you know, I'd be happy to tell you who to see and where to go and how to plug in to any of this if something sounds interesting to you. This is just a little illustration to show you what it can feel like when you're in meditation sometimes. There are a variety of ways to do this. If we want to check in with our body, many of these modalities have body scans, where you're basically just checking in with every part of your body to see what's going on. Is there a heat? Is there, is your heart racing? Are there muscles that are tight? The more you understand, the more you can engage the power of that space that Viktor Frankl talks about. So really understanding how your body responds. And in NVC, in nonviolent communication, we also do this with feelings. So if I can summon up a feeling that I have about something and do a body scan, I can get really familiar with what my body is telling me my feelings, telling me what my feelings are. And that may help me unlock a thought, or better yet, a core belief or defense mechanism that I can go to my Jungian analyst or my therapist and work with, right? So there are so many indicators that we can use to really help unlock the pause in our daily lives. I just briefly talked about the coping mechanisms and the core beliefs. The more we practice, I think the more power we have in working with these and releasing ourselves from patterns that no longer serve us. And then this slide indicates the nonviolent communication, which I've talked about almost every time I've taught this class, because this was a really powerful tool for me to understand why I do what I do, why I think what I think, and how to relate to myself and others in more connecting ways. There are a variety of practices that nonviolent communication practice groups do that have to do with specific gratitude. I'm going to go back to this for a moment to keep you from trying to read that. So when I learned a valuable lesson when our daughter was developmentally delayed, and she had a few different therapists working with her, and I really felt like I was watching her grow new neural pathways and new habits. There was this hand over hand thing that was going on with, like, get your motor started, and if you keep doing this enough, suddenly I can do it without the help, right? This is what I think some of those practices do for us, gratitude practices. The specific gratitude one in NVC looks like, suddenly I've had a glorious experience on driving on the freeway. Let me go back and celebrate that for a second. This drive was really easy. So I could say, when I merged on the freeway and a car came in front of me, I connected with my needs for respect and safety, and I didn't tailgate them, and I didn't respond. And I know it sounds cheesy, but this is building new habits, transforming habits. I can say, I responded out of respect and safety. And I made a difference by doing that. And by connecting with the needs and doing this specific gratitude practice, I am much more likely to have that come up as an option again because I've practiced it. And I think that's true of everything we do. If I've had a wonderful interaction with my child because I didn't respond from that notion that I'm not a good enough parent, or I don't know what I'm doing, or who do I think I am, all those thoughts. If I'm able to stop that for a moment and say, this child really wants to connect with me right now, I'm going to bend down and listen. As my spiritual practice at night might be sharing a specific gratitude with myself or to someone else. That I chose to take the high road. I chose to take the connecting, the loving response. And my need for being seen, for respect, to be heard, those were all met by that reaction that I had, by that response that I chose. So that's an example of specific gratitude. Beneficial regret, which is I also learned from nonviolent communication, is the other end of the spectrum. I responded terribly on the highway, for instance. I could write, I wish I had connected with my need for safety and respect. If I had, I would have taken my place on the road, given everybody space around me. And again, the more I do those practices, the more that connecting response is available to me in the moment when I'm triggered. So I kind of went through those. There are, as I learned in the spiritual direction program at the Cynical, there are a lot of monastic practices that teach these things, which I was just surprised by because I had left the church at such, I don't even want to go into all of that, but I wasn't raised in a religious environment on a week-to-week basis, and I don't even know if you learn these practices by doing that, but I was blown away by a lot of the Ignatian exercises, the Benedictine practices that do this very thing that I was learning in nonviolent communication. So I also encourage you to look into those. And one of the things that I'll share that's on the back table is when Matt Russell and I started Conspire, I started making these worksheets that basically making spiritual practice as easy as the worksheets that my kids bring home from school. And so I've developed a lot of worksheets to help us do these practices and have a little system of a workbook with daily entries where you can reflect. You can do beneficial regret every day for a week. You can do specific gratitude, whatever it is, and combine those things in a workbook to help us get practice at these. And they also include some of the monastic practices. So here's an example that I did based on the Enneagram, and it's about self-perception. And it is written in such a way that you don't need to know your type to begin to get more information about who you are and who is responding to those moments. And let's see. Here is a couple more. This is the one on specific gratitude and the one on beneficial regret. I have these on my website that you can download for free. And then I also am beginning to work with coaching clients and and doing spiritual direction for other people to help them identify which practices might be most applicable to who they are and what they're wanting to connect with. So here's another one. The Awareness Examine is one of my favorites, and I've this can actually be like specific gratitude or beneficial regret. Basically, it's a practice that the Jesuits do twice a day. They do it at noon and they do it again before bedtime. And basically what you're doing is you're scanning your day without judgment, sitting in the unconditional love of God. You can scan through your day and notice places where you were connecting with others or places where you disconnected. Where did your ego respond and where did your soul respond? And then you prayerfully sit with a specific a specific time in the day, and then move that into an intention for the next period. So they do that at noon and at bedtime. And then I've also developed some worksheets that parents can do with their children in the same vein, nonviolent communication and the Enneagram. So I asked the question, who is the responder and what wants to be transformed through our practice? I think that there's a lot of continuity to me and things that I'm attempting to learn from physics and Ilia Delio and reaching back and reading some Teilhard de Chardin, and I think that we have the ability to transform energy. Energy isn't created or destroyed, but a lot of the practice that we do transforms energy from negative to positive. That's just the way I perceive it. And one of the things that I started doing in my practice was writing and doing some journaling and writing and celebrating, if you will, some of the high points. And so I recently wrote this poem, I Sit, and it's really hard to follow Marley from last week, but I'm good enough for God, so I'm going to do it anyway. And it's Mother's Day, and this is what this was basically written about what I think my gift is in being a mom. I sit with pain, a 4-year-old's protest, a collection of every dismissed feeling, a son's realization that changes carefully cultivated friendships, a teen's inability to see the point of any of it. I survive the pain. I sit still long enough for the pain to catch up. I sit still enough to know the mystery of love within. I resist the urge to make it my tantrum, to make it my acceptance, to make it my depression. I say just enough. Go ahead, kick and scream, but not at me. Go ahead, grieve the loss of who your friends want you to be. Go ahead, mourn the absence of the light you cannot see. You do not choose these, they chose you. Ignored pain magnifies. Ask me how I know. I meet you in the moment. I do not diminish. I do not cower. I do not take it from you. I do not live through it for you. I focus on my love for you. I focus on my faith in you. We do not deny, distract, dismiss. I witness, I hold, I breathe, I love. I stand under, I sit beside. I watch you fall. Tears and tissues cascade. The last rush of grief releases. Shoulders drop. Belly softens. A grief finally released. A smaller self destroyed. I watch you rise. Oh, thank you. So the last practice I wanted to share with you is something that I learned at the Cenacle called the Minute Book. And it's something that I'm really diving into at this point. It was described to me as if you take your grandmother's Bible and you shake all of the contents out of the Bible and you gather up everything that's on the floor and you make a little book out of it. The intent, let's just a little pause music. The intent of the Minute Book, from the way I understand it, is to be reminded of who you are in God in a minute or less. So I have taken to creating digital collages that do the same thing. And one of the things that really excites me about this practice too is that it's in line with something that I learned, I believe it was from Marshall Rosenberg, who started nonviolent communication. There was a tribe in Africa that when a woman is of child-rearing age, they go into the woods or go into the wilderness and listen for the song of their child. And then when that mother is pregnant and giving birth, the tribe sings the song of the child. If that child disobeys the order of the tribe, rather than punishing, the tribe comes together to remind that child of what their song is. To me, the Minute Book practice has a way of doing that. If we can remember who we are in God, I'm a very visual learner, so if I have a visual representation of that, I can more quickly remember who I am. And so I have started doing these digital collages, and it's also a prayer practice for me to celebrate the light I see in others. And as my spiritual director reminded me this week, what about you? So I'm starting to do more of that expression about the divine in me as well. And so I just wanted to share some of these, and hoping that through some of my spiritual life coaching and spiritual direction that I get an opportunity to do these more for other people. And a friend of mine is going to host an art opening in the end of July or early August where I can present a collection of these so that we can see the community of light. And I'm calling it Interconnecting Illuminations. So this is the one I did for Mother's Day that I did for my grandmother, my mom, my sister-in-law, my sister, and my niece who's pregnant. This is my Mother's Day collage. And then I had the opportunity to have my first commission with this, and this was, I was commissioned by someone who's mentoring a girl in the juvenile justice system, and she described what she sees in her mentee, and I created this collage to celebrate the light that she sees in her mentee. And what I'm hoping to be able to do is, as I do more of this work and have an income from that, then for every one of these that I sell, I can do one for someone in the juvenile justice system, someone in a women's home, someone in a recovery program, because I myself know the power of being reminded who you are, and whether it's being listened back into being by a spiritual director or doing a practice like this that visually reminds us who we are. This was one I did for my grandmother. This is one I was praying over my sister-in-law, and I used part of the Desiderata. You are a child of the universe, no less than the trees or the stars. You have a right to be here, and whether or not it is clear to you, no doubt everything is unfolding as it should. And that last line was part of my own coming back into remembering who I was when I started coming to this class, and Barbara Burr spoke those words to me. So I always think of Barbara whenever I connect with the Desiderata or connect with myself, honestly. This is one I did for my brother. That's a painting that I did, collaged with a photo of him and our middle child, and I used part of Wendell Berry's The Peace of Wild Things. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. And then this is one I did for the paternal lineage in my family, which I realized are incredible, innovative dreamers. The top image is my great-grandfather, who is 100% Native American, and his son, who was one of the first Native American pilots in the Navy in World War II. My dad, who invents some crazy things. The last I heard, he had 27 patents. This is an image of him with his front-wheel drive, rear-wheel steering motorcycle, which you're laughing now. You should have seen him try to ride it. And then the bottom is a picture of my brother, who was a professional motorcycle racer. And the quote that I use is that every great dream begins with a dreamer, by Harriet Tubman. And this is part of my spiritual practice, too, of recognizing the light in me and embracing part of that heritage. And then this is one I did in celebration of our daughter and her spirit. And then when I was recently at UC Berkeley, I ran across this tiny little sticker at the bottom of the handrail that has the Dr. Seuss's The Lorax on it and says unless. And I thought, what a great way to end this talk. And I modified it in parentheses. But unless someone like you, each of you, cares, aka practices, a whole awful lot, the world's not going to get better. It's not. And so this is where I say, no matter where you go, you take a precious cargo, so watch your step. Thanks.